Hello and welcome to I'll Knit If I Want To. I'm Andrea Mowry of Andrea Renee Knits, and this is a little weekly podcast where I do my best to answer some of your questions and to chat about all the good fiber things. So let me get back to my questions. Okay, first of all, we just launched Knit Along number 2. So last week I chatted all about the newest DRK Spin It to Knit It Knit Along. That is a nice long knit along. We've got a whole year for that one because there's the option to spin your yarn before knitting your project. So that's why we give a lot of time for that kind of knit along. So now we have I believe it's the 4th annual DRK March to May knit along. So this one is one we do every single year, and it focuses on sweaters and shawls. So we do it for a solid 3 months, and that's to give time for these bigger projects. WIPs are welcome, your works in progress. Let's say you have a quarter or half of a sweater cast on of mine. That's more than welcome. Come join the fun. It's a great way to finish some of those projects that you've been hanging on to. Cowls are not included in this one because we are focusing on the bigger projects, but you can hop over to the Traveller knit along and knit the Traveller Cowl. There are some other knit alongs in the works for the spring that aren't going to be hosted by me, but they're going to be hosted by some other people that are going to feature a couple of my cowls. So I'll share more about that as those come about. Sometimes I do an accessory knit along during the summer when we're ready for more of like lightweight projects to carry around. So we haven't done it every year. So you let me know. Let me know if you would like an accessory knit along, and we'll see if we can squeeze that in maybe in between the spring hat knit along challenge that we do over 4 days and then before the Rhinebeck knit along. We have a little bit of time there where we could squeeze in one more. So let me know if y'all would be interested in something like that. We could focus on like socks, hats, cowls, mitts, like all the little small, fun, quicker projects. So back to the DRK March to May knit along. We have forums going on Ravelry. There are 2 because we do sweaters and shawls, and we tend to end up being a chatty bunch. We keep them separate. That way it's just a little easier to navigate them. So you can participate in both. You can just be like, nah, I'm a sweater knitter. I'm going to hang out over here, whatever floats your boat. And then we also have a hashtag we use on Instagram. I love using Instagram for knit alongs because you can follow the hashtag. So this year's hashtag is just DRK, the letters, March, the number 2, May, KAL for knit along, 24. It's in the notes below, along with links to the forums, so you don't have to remember that. But if you pop that into Instagram, if you use Instagram, you can click on the hashtag and you can follow it. So everyone else participating that has a public account, you don't already have to know them. Their photos and progress and everything will populate into your feed by following the hashtag. So I love that. One of my favorite things to do is I also like to follow hashtags for like sewing patterns, knitting patterns, yarn, whatever that I love. I do it a lot for sewing patterns because then I get to see all the different ways and body types and modifications and all the things people use for sewing patterns. Like I love it during Me Made May. So anyways, I digress, but following hashtags is a great way to participate, especially if you don't use Ravelry. You can just participate on Instagram and follow the hashtag to stay up with everyone. And if you do post on Instagram, tag me. I'm just at Andrea Renee Knits so that I can share my stories. I love to do knit along updates and share my stories so we can all follow along that way too. And as I said, it goes from March to May. It's sweaters and shawls. Am I forgetting anything else? If you haven't already signed up, sign up for my newsletter because there is a mega super sale going on for all my sweaters and shawls. That code went out and I tend to do a reminder so you haven't missed out on it yet. If you sign up for that newsletter, I usually send one more out just to say, hey, last day of the sale. So you still have time to sneak in and get that code, but you want to subscribe kind of ASAP. Okay, today I'm wearing my DRK everyday sweater, and I'll tell you what, it's one of my most worn sweaters. It truly is an everyday sweater. It's just one of those ones that's so comfortable and easy to wear. I never feel like I'm fidgeting with it. Like, it's just one of those solid pieces, you know, when you're just like, oh, what am I gonna wear today? This is kind of one of my uniform pieces where I know, oh, I can wear this and I'll feel good. Like, I'll be comfortable. I can dress it up, I can dress it down. It's cute over collared shirts, or I have a couple dresses I wear it over. I wear it under overalls. Right now I just have a fun pair of trousers on with it. So yeah, it's just one of my faves. So that's what I'm wearing. And I'm wearing, this is knit up in Mountain Meadow wool, and I love that yarn. It is a 2-ply sport weight yarn, and it is so great for sweaters. It's delightful to knit with. It's held up so well. There's very little pilling or anything that happens. I just feel like it's easy to take care of. So there's my little, what I'm wearing today. Okay, let's jump into some questions. I feel like I'm forgetting things, but we'll get there. Fingers crossed. So question number 1 is about the Douglas cardigan. Did you weave in all your new color ends as you went, or did you wait until you were finished with the sweater? If you did it when you changed colors, what method do you use? So I don't think that I wove those in as I went, because here's a little behind the scenes. When it comes to designing, there's a lot of frogging that happens. There's a lot of like, oh, this isn't quite right. I'm going to try again, tear this out. So it wouldn't make sense for me to weave them in as I go, because there's always that chance that I might tear back. I literally just knit a sweater it was done except for the sleeves. And I was like, oh, nope, my measurements are off. This is not quite where I want it to be. And so I tore it out and started again. But I do think that sometimes if you get to that place in a project where you're feeling like you're kind of setting it down a lot, losing a little bit of steam, I think that's a great time to be like, you know what? I just need to switch up what I'm doing. So I'm going to go ahead and weave in some of these ends as I go. Personally, I use duplicate stitch to weave in any and all ends except for brioche or icords. When I have brioche or an icord available, I use a different way of weaving in the ends because it's just real simple. I've shown them in past videos, but those just don't need to be quite so intricate. Otherwise, I always use duplicate stitch. I just feel like it's strong, it holds in my ends, it's tidy, and it's kind of rhythmic and fun to do. I actually don't mind. Like, weaving in ends is not my favorite part of the project. Hence why I have shown on here before, I am so guilty of having loose ends. At least unsnipped ends. I probably just need to snip off the tail. But there are a number of my knits that I still put on, and I'm like, oh... There's, especially in the underarm, it's like I think I forget. So my method of weaving in any ends is I do it pre-blocking, but I don't trim the tail until after I've blocked. Because when we block, like, there's some zhuzhing that's gonna happen, and I want things to like find their way. So I wait, and then sometimes I forget to do the final snip. But yeah, I use duplicate stitch. That works really well for me. I don't know if I've ever done a video. That would be a good tutorial to put on my list. Only I had a pen and paper. Oh, look at this, I do. Hello, even better, I have an actual notebook and paper. I'm gonna write that one down. Ooh. What did I just say? Weaving in ends. Okay, so yeah, that's what I do. But I also thought it could be fun to ask y'all what your preference is. I mean, there is something to be said for getting to the end of a project and being like, boom, I only have my bind off tail to weave in. Everything else is done. That's always delightful. So I do think it can be great. And again, to change up what you're doing during the project. Sometimes we need a little break from the knitting and then do something else. All right. Question number 2. I'm knitting your Traveller Cowl and I have an issue with the edges. I restarted the first section of the cowl 3 times already, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Both the icord edge and the slip stitch edge seem to be too tight compared to the squishy and stretchy texture of the cowl. I try knitting the I-cord loosely, but each time I have a feeling it turns out way too tight and in a way pulls the garter edges too close to each other. The same happens with the slip stitch edge. Any advice? So it is always a little hard to know without being able to watch you and look kind of over your shoulder as you do it. It can be tricky for me to diagnose why those are turning out too tight. Where my brain goes to is maybe it is that you're just giving that tug and over tightening the edges. But here's the thing. So where my brain goes to is sometimes we just have these little habits that are in our flow that we can try, like you said, you're trying to knit that I-cord looser, but it's still feeling tight to you. I don't love to try and fight against my body if I feel like it's still happening even when I'm trying to go looser. So what I think I would do is on that edge, especially for the I-cord, the I-cords where you're going to be able to put this into play, is when you get to your I-cord edge, excuse me, we're on a row, we worked the last 3 stitches and we slip those last 3 stitches with yarn in front. Then we turn our work and we knit those 3 stitches. That's our I-cord edge. After you knit those 3 stitches, stop, put those 3 stitches back on your left-hand needle, knit them again, then follow the pattern as written. You don't necessarily need to do it every row unless you feel like your I-cord is super duper tight. But you could do it, let's say, every other right side row. And what it's going to do is it's going to give you more length in your I-cord so that it feels more flexible and not so tight. So one thing that's going to happen when you do this is you might notice when you're in it and you're knitting it and you're stretching things out, what have you, you might notice a little gap, what feels like almost a little tiny hole next to your I-cord in your knitting. Do not worry about that. That cowl, I wore it on my walk today, which means it's downstairs. But that cowl has that nice plump I-cord edge. It has those garter ridges. Once you block it, any little eyelet that's gonna appear from those doubled up I-cord rows are gonna collapse. They're not gonna be an issue, but it is gonna help with the length of your actual I-cord so that you're not feeling like it's too tight. As far as your slip stitch edge goes, I don't really have a handy fix for that one, except for just try to, like, at the end of your rows, do a deep breath and try not to do that extra tug. Don't work that stitch too tight. But I also don't think I'd worry about it too much. It's gonna end up being the back seam of your cowl, and there's some decent length in that cowl for like the part that goes around your neck. So I don't think it's gonna end up causing any issues for you. Also, the fabric that is in the Traveller Cowl, it is flexible. Like it does have some nice stretch to it, but the I-cord and everything, that kind of helps keep its structure, so that it still has this nice structured feeling. So your edge doesn't have to be as stretchy as the main fabric. Edges generally kind of won't be. So I wouldn't overly worry about it. That's what I'm trying to say. But I would use that I-cord trick, because there are some people that we just knit I-cords tight. We want them to be nice and tidy. Sometimes if we try to keep them loose, we can get sloppy. So I think that working the I-cord stitches twice every few rows is just gonna help keep it nice and tidy and beautiful. All right. Next question. Question number 3. I'm excited to participate in my first DRK March to May Knit Along. Yay! I've got the yarn and I was hoping you could help me decide which pattern it would work best for. The yarn is Farmer's Daughter Fibers Foxy Lady in olive oil. Would it work better for boho blush or free your fade? So I'm pretty sure Foxy Lady's fingering. Wait. And I'm gonna go boho blush. I actually grabbed it. I grabbed it off of my shawl rack, which is kind of hiding right back here. Boop, boop. And you know what I thought could be kind of fun is take a little trip down memory lane during the knit along. because I was thinking about it as I was going through. So the thing about the sale for this knit along is I have to go through and I have to like click every single pattern, every sweater and shawl pattern for the sale to make them be available for the sale. And there are quite a few sweaters and shawls. You know, I've been doing this for about 10 years now. So I'm like, oh, wouldn't it be fun to do a little trip down memory lane? I don't know, like a little YouTube video, or maybe posting a few every day on Instagram or something. It's fun to go peek back at how far we've come. Anyways, so this is Boho Blush. This I think is my most romantic shawl. I would wear this on a date. So it has these beautiful, sweet little rows of brioche, and then it's garter, and then it's this feather and fan lace. I love all three of these ingredients. I actually have a shawl coming out in a couple weeks that uses some similar ingredients, but looks way different than this. But what I love about these little brioche sections and then the feather and fan lace is I sometimes want to relax and I just want to knit. Then I get bored and I need something that I have to put a little more effort into. That is when the brioche or the lace comes into play. The brioche gives me a similar rhythm to the garter stitch while still using a little bit more of my brain power, while the lace makes me think even more and kind of have to pay attention, do some little needle acrobatics, if you will. Nothing intense, but you know, it just gets me thinking about what I'm making more. And then there is just fun fringe. You can leave the fringe off. I've seen people go both ways, but it's just a romantic little shawl. Mine is knit out of A Verb for Keeping Warm. Oh, what yarn base is it? I'm not gonna remember off the top of my head. But it is this really bouncy. How many plies are in? I think it's just a 2-ply. It is just a 2-ply. I love a 2-ply. But it's just a bouncy, delightful yarn to work with. So anyways, this is Boho Blush, and this is what I think you should knit. So that is my recommendation. All right, I liked that easy question. Okay, number 4, we're gonna do this a little different. We haven't chatted about this kind of stuff in a while. This is kind of talking about health stuff. So what kind of doctor do you see for your autoimmune concerns? I have my own autoimmune concerns, but no idea where to start and live in an area that doesn't have the best medical options. I'm not asking for medical advice, just curious where you got started on your healing journey. So if you've been around here for a while, then you may know that I have 4 autoimmune disorders. And the thing with autoimmune disorders is once you have one, your chances of having others kind of goes up. And the more you have, the more you can end up with kind of a thing. So as this person said, I'm not a medical doctor or a professional, but I'm always happy to share things that have helped. So for me, I work with my regular doctor, but I also work with a functioning medicine doctor. And the part that I have loved about that is they really work with the whole body and how that's connected. And sometimes they can tap into issues that are going on before they become super severe to the point of needing certain specialists. At least that's been my experience. There is something like, for instance, one of my autoimmune disorders is Hashimoto's, which has to do with your thyroid. And once we figured out the Hashimoto's, we then realized I had celiac. All these different connections kind of came together, and a lot of that was with the help of my functioning medicine doctor, and my regular doctor has been super supportive of all of that. So yeah, I think finding a functioning medicine doctor, if you can, there are ways that you can find those. Like I've done mine that I do via telehealth, which is a great option if you don't have one super local. I think as long as they're in your state, then you can still work with somebody. So that might be an option, is doing a telehealth visit. One other thing that you can look into is there is Function Labs, and that can be a great option if you need to get lab work done. They run a lot of the similar lab work that a functioning medicine doctor would recommend. And that's kind of available for anywhere. They do really thorough testing. There are doctors that review it for you, but you can also take all the lab work to your doctor. So those have been some things that have helped. And there's loads of stuff online if you want to attempt any dietary changes to help support. There's a lot of stuff about autoimmune disorders and dietary changes online. Of course, always chat with your doctor to see what works best for you. But that is where I got started, and that is kind of what helped putting some pieces of the puzzle together. So best of luck on your own journey. I do think some things that anyone could implement anytime is rest. Has been huge for me. Diet's been really big, but especially because I have celiac. So once we realized that, it obviously made some big changes. So kind of avoiding some of that inflammatory foods that a lot of us are affected by, even if we don't have food allergies. And getting outside if you can. If you live in a place where you have access to the outdoors, I find that those three have been really, really big for me, especially the sleep and the getting outside. Those have been big ones. So best of luck. All right, back to knitting. I'm curious how you swatch for a colorwork sweater you plan to knit in the round. For instance, your Mackworth pattern. I would need to swatch stockinette and a colorwork repeat, but I plan to knit in the round. So should I do a circular swatch? Would I get an accurate gauge knitting in smaller circumference? Do I do a circular cheat and knit flat, but carry the yarn across the back? That always leaves my edges a mess. I feel like I'm constantly fumbling and my tension is all over the place. If I'm honest, I haven't attempted a second sweater because swatching is holding me back. Please help. So I have a couple of thoughts on this. Yes, in general, you want to swatch in the round if a sweater is knit in the round, because that's going to give you a more accurate gauge. The whole reason for that is because knits and purls are actually different sizes for most of us. A lot of times our purls are a bit of a looser gauge than our knits, and that's because of the way we wrap the yarn around our needle. So when we knit in the round and we're just knitting, that's going to create a different gauge than we are when we're knitting flat and doing both knitting and purling. So generally speaking, it is best to swatch in the round if your pattern's knit in the round. Personally, I do tend to prefer the, as you called it, like the cheat swatch, where you knit across your stitches and then you just carry a loop of yarn behind and knit across them again. So we're never turning our work. There's loads of tutorials for that online if any of you aren't sure what I'm talking about, but it's a way to swatch in the round. Excuse me. So without having to do a tube. Because a tube is small circumference, and I think that can also affect your gauge, I find that I'm a little more accurate if I do that method. So let's say I cast on 32 stitches, I knit across them, I carry the loop of yarn so that my yarn's back at that first needle tip again, and then I knit across those stitches again. So you're never turning your work and purling. So it mimics knitting in the round. And for me, because I'm not doing small circumference, I feel like my gauge stays a bit truer to what it will be for like the body of the sweater. So let's talk about the color work aspect of this. I do think it's really smart to gauge both the stockinette and your color work, because there's a good chance there's going to be a difference in gauge. But here's where I think we can, once you have more experience and once you know your own knitting best, I think that we can apply the things we know about ourselves and the way we knit to future projects to maybe avoid having to do too much lead up work if that part kind of steals your joy a little bit. So this might not be ideal for you quite yet if you're still exploring this world of knitting sweaters, knitting color work, what have you. But once you have done more, if you tend to notice, my color work tends to tighten up. When I am knitting stranded color work, my gauge tightens. You can just keep that tucked away in your head. And what I would do, unless it is an all over color work sweater, what I would do for myself right now is I would gauge swatch my stockinette, my plain knitting. I would do that in the round. And then I would take that information that I have tucked away. Okay, I'm getting gauged. Let's say I got gauged with a size 7 needle. Great. I'm going to use that size 7 needle, but I know myself, I know my knitting, and I know that pretty much every time I tighten up when I knit my stranded color work. So for the yoke of that sweater, I'm going to go up to a size 8. I'm going to go up 1 needle size because I know that's going to fix it for me. So we can utilize that information once we have that experience to pull from. But until you do, you might want to even do 2 gauge swatches. One thing you could do, especially if you do the loop method and you keep them, like you do long enough loops that you don't have to cut anything. One thing you could do, especially if you're at all worried about how much yarn you have, is you could do your main fabric, your stockinette fabric, swatch that, doing the cheat method, if you like that method. Block it, dry it, measure it. Let's say you get gauge. Awesome. Unravel it. And now do a color work gauge swatch. You reusing that yarn and your color work yarn. One of the benefits to swatching your color work as well is you can double test the color fastness of your yarns you're going to use together. So if there's any ever any threat of yarn bleeding, the dye bleeding from any of your yarns, the swatch is a great opportunity when you block it to make sure everything stays color fast. That's the word I want, right? I was about to say steadfast. So sorry, I have a little sheep right here. It was distracting me because it's so cute and it had fallen over. Okay, so that would be the other benefit to swatching that color work. And I think in the beginning, until you know where you fall in that line, my gauge actually stays pretty steady in color work. I don't tend to tighten up a whole bunch, but it's really, really common. So it's good to learn that about yourself. And until you're sure, it doesn't hurt to swatch. As I've said before, it's just more knitting. But I do understand. Oh, also, I know you mentioned that when you do the cheat swatch, your edges are sloppy. Everyone's edges are sloppy. So don't even worry too much about that. The important thing is that you are knitting a big enough swatch so that you're measuring the interior. Like, let's say this is my swatch I've knit and here's my messy edges. That would be fine, because when I go to measure my 4 inches or 10 centimeters in here, I have enough space to do that without even needing to worry about those sloppy edges. And again, if you leave the loops long enough in the back of your yarn, you don't even have to cut it. You could then unravel it and use that yarn. So if it will give you the peace of mind to know, hey, my gauge is where it needs to be and this sweater is going to be the exact dimensions I want it to be, great. Do a big old swatch, because it's just more knitting and it's fun. Throw on an audiobook, a podcast, a Netflix, and just consider the swatch as part of the party, especially because it will give you the confidence to really enjoy that sweater as you're knitting it, because you already know it's going to turn out how you want it to turn out, right? All right. I think we answered all of those. I did a bonus question because I knew that my easy one, where I just got to say which one I would knit with that yarn, was kind of a cheat. So last question is the night shift shawl. This pattern was fun and so easy to memorize. My question is, I used a slightly lighter weight yarn and went down 1 needle size based off the yarn label. I assumed I could just knit to the right measurements by increasing the number of pattern repeats. However, my depth ended up bigger than the pattern and I had to stop short of the wingspan length. Why is this? I can't wrap my brain around the math of it. So you did exactly what I would have done if I was going to use a lighter weight. Like for the night shift shawl, I used Dream State, which is from Spin Cycle, and it is a worsted weight yarn. But I have seen quite a few people actually knit it in Dyed in the Wool, which is their sport weight yarn, and it is beautiful and lovely and really wonderful for people who don't want a thicker shawl, especially depending on the area you live in. So that is why there's also a recipe in that pattern, which I don't know if you saw that, but you were spot on. You basically just continue repeating. So what I think happened is there's 2 things. One, you can block your shawl. So like if you're looking at it right now, you're like, I wish it had a longer wingspan and less depth. Block it again. and pull that wingspan. You can really zhuzh a shawl as it's blocking. So you can stretch the wingspan farther and pin it. And that, because you are stretching it this way, it is also going to suck up some of that length as you do that. So you can manipulate the size and shape of that shawl to an extent. As far as why it happened, one, again, could just be how it's blocked. But number two can be that the change in gauge, your stitch shape may have been a bit different than the stitch shape that's created with the needle and yarn combination of the original. So it doesn't necessarily create a perfect ratio of height and width of one stitch when using one needle and yarn thickness and changing that. So you probably had stitches that were a bit longer instead of wider, and compared to the original. And there's lots that can go into that. I mean, in general, I've talked about this before, but Clara Parks teaches or taught a class where she would have the entire class use the same yarn and same size needles and swatch with the same amount of stitches. And when everyone finishes their swatches at the end, they are all different. So we all just create stitches differently, but especially with mosaic knitting creates such an interesting fabric structure because of those slip stitches. So you're not, unlike stranded color work where you are working every single stitch in that row, every row. You just alternate colors and create different pictures that way, different motifs. With mosaic knitting, we are not working all the stitches every single row. We might on some rows, but on other rows, we are slipping stitches and they get stretched. So that's also changing the shape of that individual stitch, which is going to affect gauge in the different ways that it is. So there you go. That hopefully makes sense. Okay, I do have a itty bitty show and tell today, and that is a new pair of socks. So this was my walking project for the past few weeks. I needed just a quick, easy, don't have to think about it project. Right now, a lot of my designs on the needles are bigger. They're sweaters, and that is tricky to walk and knit with because I don't want to fudge my gauge. So during one of these, somebody had asked me about how I knit my socks on Magic Loop. So that was during a live class, and I wanted to show them. So I just cast these on. This is using Gauge Dye Works. What is this one called? I want to say Sun and Moon, but I don't think that's right. You'll recognize it in the skein on their website if you want to check it out, because it's all these colors. But I just love those blues and the yellow, and all I did was added some sporty stripes to the top because I thought it would be fun. So these are just the DRK Everyday Socks. I actually just gave them a bath last night. I might even put them on when I'm finished with this because right now I'm just wearing slippers. But that is all the show and tell I have right now. I don't think... I'm trying to think if I have any handspun I haven't shown. Maybe I haven't shown this. Have I shown you my mega bat? Well, we can look at it again. So if you follow me on Instagram or my newsletter, you may have seen a very silly picture where I was wrapped up in a mega bat. A mega bat is from Melly Knits, and they are ginormous. I think it was 235 grams. So I mean, it's like a blanket of fiber. And so I spun mine up. I did not wrap this skein well. Just hide my sins there. So I spun this all on my spindles. It is a 2-ply. I haven't gotten the specs yet, so I don't know the yardage. I'm gonna guess it's about a sport weight. I tend to think everything's a sport weight, and then sometimes I knit it and I'm like, oh, this is DK. So we'll see. I haven't done the specs yet. But I will tell you what, I can't get over how soft the yarn is that is coming off of my spindles. I mean, it's all woolen spun. It's all supported long draw, and so it is just like so light. But anyways, I love it. So that's my latest spin. That's my finished knit. I have a new shawl pattern coming out in just a couple weeks, and there's a new sweater coming out in April. So I am busy, busy, busy here behind the scenes, but I hope you will join us for one of the knit-alongs and our 100 days of spindle spinning is almost over. Hold on, let's do some math. We have, okay, we're not quite there yet. 9:30, I think we are on day, no. Andrea, do your math. Okay, I think we have 10 days left. I feel like I said that last week though. I should check on that. But it's almost over. Our 100 days of spindle spinning is almost over, but it has been so much fun. And I'll tell you what, it threw me into quite the love affair with spindle spinning. I am shocked how much I love it. I feel bad for my wheels. I've talked about this, but it's kind of stolen my heart. I just love it. I love how portable it is. I love how beautiful they are. Looking at a spindle right now. I mean, they're works of art, and then we get to use them and make more art. I mean, it's just the circle of life. All right, I should end this before I just start babbling nonsense. So I hope you'll have such a great weekend. I hope you come join the fun in one of the knit-alongs. If you have a question, there is a link down at the bottom of the show notes below that you click to fill out questions. Make sure you fill out that form to ask your question, because otherwise it gets lost. So that form is the best way to do it. And I hope that you get to make something fun this weekend. And I hope to see you back here next week. Have a great weekend. Bye.